When a bird is born, it grows and naturally learns how to take its first flight, how to hunt, how to build a nest, and how to survive. These, too, inherently know how to pollinate the planet and create honey. All animals in the animal kingdom have a specific skill and purpose which they fulfill perfectly. In general, part of an animal's purpose is to learn about survival. This part of life, in the evolution of a soul, is known as the animal kingdom. On the next level of consciousness is the human kingdom. At this level, the purpose is not the same as an animal's, yet this is how most of humanity's way of being is oriented, struggling for survival. This is not the purpose of what it means to be human, and when we live like that, we live spiritually no different from animals. In this way, much of what we see in the animal kingdom on this planet is a reflection of the vast animal-like human psyche, or in other words, ego, the false sense of self, the illusory sense of identity. The real purpose of what it means to be human is to awaken consciousness, to transcend the limitations of our animal nature, and to embark on the path of self-realization and spiritual development, which goes far beyond the instinctual drive for survival. Your purpose is to realize the divine nature within yourself, your sacred connection to all that is. That is why you are here, to awaken to the higher dimensions of cosmic intelligence, to become like man in the image of God rather than man in the image of an animal. When we reflect on what ego is, we can find insights by understanding that its nature parallels different types of animals, depending on the different types of egos. This is because, in previous lives, in the evolution of our soul, we lived through existences in the mineral kingdom, then in the vegetable or plant kingdom, then the animal kingdom, and finally in the human kingdom. The problem is, we do not intimately understand the purpose of what it means to exist in the human kingdom because almost all of our consciousness is still submerged and attached to our animal nature, our lower ego nature. On the surface, in the physical world, we look like humans, but in the light of the astral plane and the inner worlds, it is common for us to appear or symbolically reflect as animals. If we are on the path of self-transformation, our animal nature may also transform into different types of animals as we progress, until one day we no longer represent animals and finally reflect our true divine essence, our real human nature. This is why various traditions in the past have something called spirit animals, which were a way for the wise people of a community to teach individuals about their own nature. This is also why there are many children's stories, books, and movies about animals who act and talk like humans because we subconsciously understand this spiritual truth within ourselves. Karma, past lives, and illuminating the unconscious mind. It's important to note that while this truth exists in our internal worlds, it is still a level of illusion within us. These symbolic representations are not meant to condemn our ego-animal nature, but rather to illustrate and reflect on the negative aspects of our own psychological states. We must understand the ego not as a mental mechanical robot, but as something more similar to an animal. The key to spiritual growth lies in transforming or transmuting our deep ego-driven emotions into their positive counterparts through self-observation, self-reflection, and inner work. When an aspect of our lower animal psyche dissolves within us, it gives birth to something new, a higher form of consciousness. This is a gradual process that takes time. Recalling past lives also takes time. When we were children, we had far more potential to access the memories of our past lives. However, due to conditioning from society, culture, parents, school, and technology, children's attention quickly becomes attached to the external senses, blocking the development of the inner senses. Further, when puberty initiates, so too does the force of one's psyche and karma begin to intensify. Unfortunately, without spiritual guidance, it is all too easy for us to get lost as we grow into adulthood. This is how 99% of the population lives, being born into multiple lives without knowing the purpose of our existence. We waste time and precious energy chasing futile desires of career, material possessions, relationships, status, security, and sex. None of these things are wrong. They are part of life. But it is our attachment and identification with them that keeps our consciousness asleep. However, when one redirects their focus away from the horizontal dimension of time and directs it inward towards the vertical aspect of their being, one can begin to illuminate their inner workings, their own nature, and attain self-knowledge. With self-knowledge, one can begin to understand the causes for their psychological dispositions, life dramas, desires, attachments, relationships, and karma. This is all intimately related to actions made in previous existences. Our karma is the accumulated effects of inner psychological causes born in previous lives. If you want to remember your past lives, there are two principles. First, to understand consciousness as ego and essence, the veil of illusion, and reflect on both in meditation and daily life. We must understand precisely what condition our consciousness is currently in. Observe this. We all have consciousness. In its fully liberated, enlightened state, it is pure light, a divine spark connected to the highest dimensions of existence and understanding. However, for the average person, their consciousness consists of 3% awakened essence and 97% ego. We cannot grow spiritually, awaken our consciousness, or remember our past lives as long as we do not comprehend our ego nature. This is why we do not remember our past lives, because our consciousness is asleep, overtaken by our unconscious ego. Remember, we are not condemning the ego or making it our enemy. We are here to comprehend it, to acquire self-realization. Our ego or egos, the multiplicity of our psychological state, is the reason we do not know who we are, where we came from, or what to do. If we did, we would remember our past lives, know our past experiences, our purpose in this life, and what we need to achieve spiritually. In summary, genuinely and authentically dissolving the ego will enable you to remember your past lives. Our ego holds the memories of past lives, bottled up in unconscious psychological patterns we do not yet see. Let us understand this more intimately. Our ego is a separate sense of self, made up of psychological entities that live within our inner world, inhabiting the space of our consciousness. These entities have their own desires that control us and make us unconscious, continually repeating their negative thoughts in our psychological space day to day, week to week. Year to year and from life to life, egos are not just about very negative behaviors or things that society would consider ethically wrong. Egos are also the very small and minute details about our psychology, the small things we think and feel unconsciously throughout our day-to-day life. These psychological ways of being, these small patterns that we have within us, also have emotional and mental forms that can be perceived as actual people or animals in the astral plane. Often, when we have dreams of many random people, strangers, or creatures, they actually represent our own psychological crowd. They appear symbolically in dreams because they remain in our unconscious, ambiguous awareness. They are hidden, camouflaged in the veil of ignorance and lack of self-knowledge. As long as the hidden parts of our psyche remain unseen, they continue to exist and persist within us. Psychological entities influence us in the astral plane. For example, an ego of anger may manifest in a man once a week, making the atmosphere of his family's house very low and fearful. The negative psychological mood of this particular ego possesses the physical body of the man and fulfills its unconscious desire to cause chaos, arguments, and problems. If the man cannot control or stop this from happening, it means he does not comprehend this part of himself, and it will continue to manifest mechanically week to week, month to month, and life to life as long as it remains unobserved. But if this man sincerely took up spiritual practice in a serious way, he might encounter this particular ego of anger in the astral plane, which could appear as a creature, an animal, or even a man who looks identical to himself. In this experience, if his consciousness is awake, he could ask this ego the reason for its existence and might receive an interesting answer. We cannot overcome ego by reading books about it or taking advice from others. We can only truly comprehend it by deeply and intimately observing ourselves, because the answers for understanding ourselves remain within. This doesn't have to happen through astral projection alone. That is just an example of how our meditative process can work. When we are truly on this journey of transformation, through psychological investigation combined with meditation and transmutation, we are able to transcend and dissolve lower aspects of our being. Reflect back on this diagram. 3% essence, 97% ego. If ego were not present, there would be 100% essence, 100% awakened consciousness. To free even just 1% or 2% of essence, if an individual could possess even 5% or 10% essence, they would possess an enormous amount of self-realization and begin to have spiritual experiences. All the hidden powers of the soul, such as telepathy, omniscience, astral projection, clairvoyance, and control over life, are hidden within our conditioned, trapped essence. But the essence is being used by ego, which is why the ego has such tremendous power over our lives and the world. It uses the divine powers of our soul, which is our essence, to give itself life and existence and to feed its desires. It is our essence that keeps the ego alive. Attachment fuels ego. It uses our divine human capacities to manifest its own desires, leading more of our essence into suffering, confusion, unfulfillment, greed, fear, and so on. This is karma, ego unconsciously manifesting. But again, let us be careful not to condemn our unconsciousness, but instead take responsibility for what we hold within. In this way, it is not entirely true that egos are a totally separate sense of self. They are not totally separate from us, which is why we should never judge them. The deeper truth is that they are an intimate part of ourselves because they are using our essence, our consciousness, which remains bottled up inside. Essence is trapped in ego, waiting to be liberated through self-realization. Just as a thief steals from us, we have to learn to steal it back, like hunting down pirates to reclaim our stolen treasures. This is the meaning of, in order to ascend, we have to descend into the world of our conditioning to shed light on what we do not see. We do this through self-observation and meditation. The point of this teaching, which you may realize for yourself if you've been reflecting deeply, is that if you dissolve a particular cause of a desire, meaning, if you liberate a particular unconscious psychological pattern, if you truly free yourself from it and transcend it, you will extract self-realization from it. Consequently, you will naturally begin to remember your past lives, because within that particular ego, within that part of your psyche that you have liberated, holds the memory of when it fulfilled its desires in past lives. Ego holds the memories of our past lives. Now, keeping in mind this understanding of our consciousness as ego and essence towards our past lives, let us introduce the understanding of personality and the physical body. Each person holds ego, essence, a physical body, and personality. When we die, the physical body and personality die. The physical body and death, what dies? The ego and the essence do not die. We carry our ego and essence from life to life. In conventional understanding, we might assume that our ego is a result of our upbringing as children, but the deeper, esoteric truth is that the external manifestations of our life are simply a reflection of our internal karma. It would be great if our ego died when our physical body dies, but it does not. Remember that in our conditioned state, ego is part of our essence, and our essence is part of the vertical, eternal aspect of our being. Ego is a conditioned, negative aspect of our own eternal nature. This is why it is said that hell is eternal suffering. This does not mean hell lasts forever, but it lasts as long as our attachment to it remains, as long as ego remains. This is why it is said in many teachings, including the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, that we must learn how to die before we die if we truly want everlasting life. This means to know how to die internally to our own false sense of self, our ego. We carry the same egos through each life. What goes to the grave is personality and the physical body. Our ego and essence remain as part of our non-physical consciousness. Our ego lives through all of our past personalities. Personality is simply the outward expression of the internal makeup of our consciousness. In each life we are born into, there are similarities in our personality, but generally speaking, each personality is different because, in each life, we are born into different conditions, cultures, appearances, and sometimes as a different gender. The way we feel about the conditions of each life is different, and that forms our outer personality, but the egos and the particular essence remain the same. More or less, the idiosyncrasy of our ego psychology can shift and transform, especially if we go through enough pain and suffering in certain lives, and if we have enough spirit or willpower to change ourselves. For example, a criminal who suffered dire consequences from his actions in a previous life may have a strong desire not to be a criminal in his next life. That's his personality. That's his personal choice on the surface layer of his life. However, that does not mean he has dissolved the egos that want to commit crimes. Internally, even though he may seem like a normal man, it is likely he still suffers from certain dark thoughts or temptations. On the surface, his personality, his persona, will outwardly appear different from his previous life. When someone dies without having achieved self-realization, usually that person will soon. Law of return and recurrence. Karmic cycle of rebirth, we enter into another womb and into circumstances that can facilitate our karma. This is why we should pay very careful attention to the scenes of our life. Our life is a movie to be understood. If we do not understand why our life has turned out the way it has, then we will keep repeating the same experiences until we do. This is why the Greek philosopher Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Most people do not examine their lives because they blame external circumstances or people. To solely blame others or external circumstances for all our misery and negative occurrences is an illusion. What we experience in this life is according to karma, and in each life, this karma repeats itself as long as we remain blind to it. We must learn to be genuinely interested and curious in observing our life deeply in order to be liberated from it. This is why, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said, "The fire of self-knowledge burns all karma to ashes." Our recurring lives are our karma. This is called the law of recurrence, which means that in each life, the ego repeats its desires, dramas, emotions, ambitions, etc. It also repeats itself according to the same people we meet at certain ages and during certain life events. The scenes or impressions of the external world simply trigger unconscious psychological states that already lay dormant within us. Ego is never caused by external life. It simply awakens something that was already within us. Simply put, ego repeats its desires mechanically, and as stated before, our ego uses our divine powers. It knows how to get us to enter another womb after we die and how to manifest the same dramas. It compels our essence to come back again and again, to exist in the physical world and repeat the same dramas over and over. This is called the law of return, returning through the cycle of death and birth to mechanically fulfill the law of recurrence. The law of return is the correct term for what happens to 99% of the population. The term reincarnation points to something else. It refers to when someone with awakened consciousness, a genuine master, consciously decides to incarnate into a physical body by their own free will. We cannot say the same for ourselves because the average, sleeping person does not choose to incarnate. They are controlled by the law of recurrence, which our ego unconsciously submits us to. One of the main powers that the ego uses within us is telepathy. For example, if an ego wants to find a particular person to fight with, it will telepathically find a corresponding person who holds an ego that desires the same type of fight. As another example, if two people at a particular age desire to get married, they will telepathically find each other again at the same age as in their previous life. In each life, events happen and desires of the ego are fulfilled at the same age with the same people. This is the law of recurrence, the same dramas playing out in the movies of our recurring lives. We are unconsciously born into this cycle through the law of return. The law of recurrence and the law of return point to the eternal and cyclical nature of existence. This points to the wheel of samsara, which can also be symbolized by the image of the Ouroboros, an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or dragon devouring its own tail, forming a circle without beginning or end. It signifies the eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, governed by the law of cause and effect, karma. Time, in its essence, is circular rather than linear. Within this cyclical nature, we find ourselves repeating the same patterns and experiences until we awaken our consciousness. Our repetitive existence is a consequence of our unconsciousness and the mechanical nature of our actions and ways of being. As long as our consciousness remains asleep, we are bound to repeat the same mistakes and suffer the same consequences of our past actions. However, through self-observation and self-knowledge, we can awaken our consciousness and break free from this cycle of repetition. By recalling and learning from our past experiences and past lives, our intuition becomes vibrantly alive, leading to intimate comprehension of why we did what we did and how it connects to our current life. By remembering our past existences, we can consciously choose a different path, thus gradually liberating ourselves from the wheel of recurrence. The Ouroboros serves as a reminder of the need to awaken our consciousness and escape the repetitive patterns of existence. We can take our first steps by remembering our past lives. In Part 2, we'll explore this wisdom more practically and look at different meditation exercises you can do to remember your past lives for yourself.